The entire restaurant went silent when the single father finally slammed his tray onto the table and said the words nobody had ever dared to say to the billionaire sitting in front of him: "I'm not your maid. Stop mocking me." For a moment, nobody moved. Waiters froze. Customers turned in their chairs. Even the manager looked terrified. But the billionaire didn't get angry. Instead, he stared at the exhausted man standing before him, and something in his expression suddenly changed. Because behind that angry voice was a pain the billionaire recognized all too well. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that we never truly know what someone else is going through, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Your support helps us bring more stories that remind us there is still goodness in the world. Daniel Carter was 38 years old, a single father, and the kind of man who had learned to swallow his pride before breakfast. Every morning, he woke up at 4:45, packed a small lunch for his 8-year-old daughter Emily, prepared her school uniform, and quietly checked the balance in his bank account before leaving for work. The number was always frighteningly low. His rent was overdue. His car needed repairs. Emily needed new shoes. And the hospital bill from her mother's final illness still sat inside a drawer, unopened because Daniel already knew he could not afford it. After losing his wife 2 years earlier, Daniel had taken every job he could find. During the day, he worked as a restaurant server at an expensive downtown restaurant where wealthy businessmen spent more on dinner than he sometimes had for an entire week. At night, he delivered groceries. On weekends, he cleaned offices. He never complained in front of Emily. To her, Daddy was a superhero who could fix anything with a screwdriver, a smile, and a promise that tomorrow would be better. One rainy Tuesday evening, Daniel was working the late shift when the restaurant manager whispered that an important guest had arrived. Everyone knew the name. Adrian Blackwood was a billionaire investor whose companies controlled hotels, technology firms, and luxury properties across the country. He was famous for being brilliant, demanding, and almost impossible to impress. Daniel was assigned to Adrian's table. From the moment Adrian sat down, nothing seemed good enough. The water was too warm. The chair was slightly crooked. The menu took too long. Daniel apologized each time, even though most of the problems had nothing to do with him. He kept his expression calm because he needed the job. Then Adrian noticed Daniel's worn shoes. He looked down at them and smirked. Daniel pretended not to notice. Later, when Daniel brought the main course, Adrian deliberately dropped his napkin onto the floor and stared at him. Daniel bent down, picked it up, and placed it beside the plate. A few minutes later, Adrian dropped it again. This time, Daniel paused. He looked at the napkin, then at Adrian. Adrian smiled as if he were testing how far he could push him. Daniel quietly picked it up again. But when Adrian made another mocking remark about Daniel being good at cleaning up after rich people, something inside him cracked. Daniel had spent 2 years surviving insults, exhaustion, and humiliation because his daughter needed food on the table. But that night, he remembered Emily asking him that morning why he always looked tired. He remembered telling her that everything was okay when it wasn't. He remembered his wife's final words before she died: "Promise me you'll never let this world convince you that you're less than anyone else." And suddenly, Daniel stood straight. He placed the tray down and told Adrian exactly what he had been holding inside. "I'm not your maid. Stop mocking me." The silence afterward felt heavier than the rain outside. The manager rushed toward the table, apologizing to Adrian and preparing to fire Daniel immediately. But Adrian raised one hand. "Wait." Daniel stood there, breathing heavily, expecting the worst. Instead, Adrian asked him a strange question. "Why do you keep working when you're clearly exhausted?" Daniel looked away. He didn't want sympathy. He didn't want pity. He simply said that his daughter needed him. Adrian leaned back and studied him carefully. For the first time that evening, there was no arrogance in his face. He asked Daniel where the girl's mother was. Daniel hesitated before quietly explaining that she had died after a long illness. He explained that he had taken multiple jobs to keep Emily in school and that some nights he slept only 3 or 4 hours. Adrian said nothing. Daniel assumed the billionaire was bored and wanted him gone. But then Adrian asked if he could meet Emily. Daniel immediately refused. He had heard enough stories about powerful men taking advantage of desperate people. He didn't trust Adrian, and he didn't want his daughter anywhere near the billionaire's world. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the restaurant and discovered that Adrian had returned. This time, he wasn't sitting at the expensive table. He was standing near the entrance. In his hand was a small paper bag. Daniel approached cautiously. Adrian handed it to him. Inside were a pair of brand new children's shoes. Daniel stared at them. Adrian simply said they were for Emily. Daniel's pride immediately rose again. He told Adrian that he didn't need charity. Adrian nodded and replied that he wasn't offering charity. He was offering Daniel an opportunity. Adrian had quietly investigated the restaurant that morning and discovered something disturbing. The restaurant had been underpaying several employees and forcing them to work unpaid overtime. Daniel wasn't the only person being mistreated. Adrian had recently purchased the building. He could have fired everyone. Instead, he wanted Daniel's help. He offered him a position managing the restaurant staff, with a salary nearly 3 times what Daniel earned. Daniel thought it was a trick. But Adrian explained that he had spent most of his life surrounded by people who were afraid to tell him when he was wrong. Daniel had been the first person in years to stand in front of him without pretending. Then Adrian said something Daniel never expected. "You weren't disrespectful that night." "I was." Daniel's eyes filled with tears, but he quickly looked away. He accepted the job. Over the next few months, Daniel transformed the restaurant. He changed schedules so employees could spend time with their families. He created a fair tip system. He made sure nobody was humiliated for making mistakes. And slowly, the restaurant became one of the most respected places in the city. But something even more important happened. Adrian changed. He began visiting the restaurant not as an owner, but as a man trying to understand the people who worked for him. One afternoon, Adrian saw Emily sitting at a corner table doing her homework while Daniel finished paperwork. Emily looked up and asked Adrian why he always looked so serious. Adrian smiled awkwardly. He told her that he had forgotten how to laugh. Emily looked at him and said, "Then you should practice." For the first time in years, Adrian laughed. A real laugh. And Daniel realized that perhaps the billionaire had been carrying his own invisible pain. Months later, Daniel received a letter from the hospital. The old medical debt had been completely paid. He immediately confronted Adrian. Adrian admitted he had helped, but he refused to accept Daniel's gratitude. He told him that money could pay a bill, but it couldn't bring back the people they had lost. Daniel understood. The two men had entered each other's lives from completely different worlds. One had billions of dollars but almost no one he trusted. The other had very little money but a daughter who gave him a reason to keep fighting. Neither man saved the other with money. They saved each other by reminding one another what human dignity was worth. Years later, Daniel became the director of several restaurants owned by Adrian. Emily grew into a confident young woman who still teased Adrian whenever he became too serious. And every year, on the anniversary of Daniel's wife's passing, Adrian quietly left flowers at her grave. Not because he had to. Because he understood. Sometimes the people who look the strongest are carrying the heaviest pain. Sometimes a person who appears rude is simply exhausted from being invisible. And sometimes one brave sentence spoken at the right moment can change 2 lives forever. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Your support helps these stories reach people who may need a little hope today. And before we end, I have one special request for you. Comment, "Kindness still matters," if you believe that every person deserves dignity, respect, and a second chance. Because Daniel didn't become powerful when he became a manager. He became powerful the night he finally remembered his worth. And Adrian didn't become a better man because he gave away money. He became better when he finally learned to see the human being standing in front of him. Sometimes, the greatest wealth in the world isn't found in a bank account. It's found in kindness.